When I started developing in Magento 2 back in 2015, I had nothing but headaches. I just couldn't get anything installed. I tried installing Magento locally on my machine, but had tons of dependency issues and software conflicts, which led me down the path of Docker. If you don't know how Docker works, it's sort of a virtualization process that compartmentalizes your code into specific containers. And those containers are running isolated services. So PHP, for example, would be one container, Nginx would be another one, MySQL would be another container, and so on. And these containers run isolated from other containers, which means it's very easy to swap one service for another, upgrade versions, and so on. After dealing with all of these headaches and nuances of running Docker in Magento, I finally came up with the repo and idea for docker-magento. I know it's a very generic name and I never expected it to take off like it did, but it's on the verge of hitting 2,000 stars on GitHub. I'm blown away by the support that I've received and all of the contributors and contributions that have happened to this repo, and it just amazes me how well it does even to this day. Let's get into it. I'd like to go over how to set up a Magento development environment very quickly with Docker-Magento. It just really takes one command. The repo is available on GitHub at markschust/docker-magento. And if you scroll down, you'll see tons of info in this README about everything relating to this project. This includes links to the builds on Docker Hub, a link to the free course at M Academy. So I created an entire course on everything about this repo setup and dev environment setup. So be sure to check that out. And if we keep scrolling, we will see links to all of the lessons in the course, and we will finally make our way into this setup section. This is really simple. All we need to do is make a directory and go into it and then run this single curl command. I'm going to copy this command to the clipboard. Then I'm going to go into terminal and let me go in my sites directory, which is the home directory on Mac for website development. Note that you must be in some subdirectory of your home directory for Docker permissions to work correctly. You also want to make sure that Apache, Nginx, MySQL, none of that is running on your host machine at the time of this setup. While the containers do run the services isolated, they do expose the port on your host machine as the default ports as port 80, 3306, and so on. Our next step is to create a folder for our Magento setup. I'm going to create another folder named M2, and then I will go into it. Now, all we need to do is paste that line in that I copied. And there are a couple options that we can go through here. First is the domain name. By default, it's set to magento.test. Let's change this to m2.test. I use the test TLD because it doesn't conflict with other primary domain names such as .com, .net, .org, and it gives you an isolated environment to work off of. You also don't want to use .localhost because it conflicts with Docker network settings. Next comes the version of Magento that you'd like to install. At the time of this video, it's 2.4.6, which just recently came out. And then the third parameter that we can pass in is the type of Magento install that we'd like to install. This can be community or enterprise. Community stands for Magento open source, which is the open source version that we all know and love. And Adobe Commerce is enterprise. To actually download it and run either of these, you do need to set up your composer auth.json file on your host machine. And for Commerce, you would need access to that Commerce repo because it's commercial software. I'm going to just install Community right now, which is open source, and go ahead and execute this line. This will download all of the appropriate containers if they haven't been downloaded already. Once they're downloaded, you can install this Magento instance really quickly. This boots up the containers and then immediately starts downloading all of the requirements for Magento. This includes the many libraries and packages that are included in Magento. There are over 100,000 files. And you don't need to worry about any of this because it's done for you automatically. At this point, it stops and restarts the containers to ensure all of the appropriate services are running for Magento to actually be installed. And then it copies all of the files from the container back to the host. Docker-Magento uses a very specific setup I call selective sync that I created that makes everything performant, even with very large file systems on Docker. In order to install a secure certificate, it does need to create a new local certificate authority chain, and it will prompt you for a system password. So let's go ahead and enter this. and you will get an additional prompt for another password. Let's go ahead and enter that. At this point, it will again stop and restart the containers to ensure that SSL cert is installed at the time that Nginx is started. It will also install some additional development tools that are very handy during Magento development. And then the setup is pretty much complete. That's all we did. We ran pretty much that one line and entered our password a couple times, and Magento is installed. We are given our URL, m2.test. And if we head back to the browser and go to m2.test, and we can tell that Magento 246 is now completely installed. And that's all we had to do. Docker-magento also comes with a huge set of helper scripts. When I started this project, I just ran native Docker commands. But as it became more popular, I knew that people just wouldn't understand Docker. So I built scripts that help extrapolate the Docker away. This is why it makes it so easy to onboard new developers to your team, because they don't really even need to know anything about Docker. If we go back to the README, and scroll down, we will see a list of custom fly commands. All of these commands run the underlying Docker commands in the background, so you don't even ever have to worry about it. And this includes the infamous bin/magento command. We can use this command to also install sample data. Let's go back to command line and I'll clear this out. And then we will just run bin/magento sample data deploy. This is a native Magento command that installs all of these packages with Composer. And to activate sample data, we need to run another command. Let me go ahead and clear out this terminal again. And then we will run bin/magento setup upgrade. And this will run through all of that installed module code and run the setup upgrade scripts, which does in turn install the sample data to Magento's database. When I'm learning Magento, I always like to install sample data because it gives me sort of a data set to work off of, so I'm not working with a blank store at all. And if you are looking to learn Magento, be sure to check out m.academy, which is my Magento training business that I've been doing for a few years now. I have many hundreds of students learning Magento and getting trained on it, and many teams. So be sure to check it out. It just makes learning Magento so much simpler. And when that setup upgrade command completes executing, we can go back to our web browser and refresh the page. And we will see Magento now load with all of that sample data, which is amazing. And now we can use this to start our development processes. If you have found docker-magento useful in the past, be sure to go back to the GitHub repo and give it a star if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it. And if you already started, give this video another like to help it spread to other Magento developers. There are many other development tools available for Magento. Be sure to check out this next video, which I'm sure you'll love and find helpful in your M2 dev processes. And as always, keep coding.